"I would sooner let Ellsmere crumble stone by stone than wed a clockmaker's daughter," said Maximilian Carstairs, Duke of Ellesmere, to his steward, and the words came out of him cold and certain, the way a man speaks of weather he has already lived through. He would not succeed in keeping that vow, but he did not know it yet, and so he said it once more very quietly to be sure the morning had heard him. It was the first hour after dawn, and the great house lay around him in its accustomed silence. For 4 years the silence had been a kind of furniture, something he leaned against, something he had grown to mistake for peace. His wife had died on a morning much like this one, and the tower clock above the East Court had stopped at the very minute of her passing, and Maximilian had never had it wound again. He told himself this was reverence. It was not reverence. It was that the silence suited him, and the stopped hands suited him, and a house in which nothing moved could ask nothing of him. He had not wanted the clockmaker sent for at all. That had been Crabbe's doing, and the slow pressure of 40 things that could not go on. For the bell of Ellesmere was not the Duke's bell only. It was the village's bell, and the mill's bell, and the bell by which 100 men knew when to rise and when to break, and when to come in from the far fields. The whole working day of the estate had once been hung upon that single iron voice, and for 4 years the day had run ragged without it, the mill hands quarrelling over the hour, the harvest gangs scattering early, the church and the manor and the cottages each keeping a different and a private time. A duke might indulge his grief, an estate could not, and so, against everything in him, Maximilian had at last given the word, and a letter had gone to the finest hand in 3 counties, and the finest hand in 3 counties had written back to say he would come within the fortnight, and would bring his daughter. "You disapprove," said Maximilian. His steward, Crabbe, who had served the Carstairs family for 40 years, and had buried 2 dukes already, stood by the cold hearth with his hands folded, and said nothing at all. He had a gift for saying nothing that amounted, in the end, to a great deal. "I never disapprove of your grace before breakfast," he said. "It is bad for the digestion, mine, not your grace's. You think me unkind to the man. I think nothing of the man whom I have not met. I think only that he comes a long way to do your grace a service, and that the road is bad, and that a fire in the east rooms would cost the estate 3 logs and earn it a quiet week." He paused, with the delicacy of a man laying down a single card. "And I think it has been 4 years, your grace, and that a widower is free to be civil to a tradesman without anyone fearing for his heart. My heart is in no danger from a clockmaker's girl." "No, your grace," said Crabbe, "I am sure it is not." The Sayers came at noon in a hired trap, and Maximilian watched them from the library window, because he had decided he would not go down to meet a tradesman and his daughter, and watching from a window was a way of refusing to go down that still let him see. The old man came first, handed from the seat by a groom. He was tall and stooped, and his eyes were the pale, fixed blue of a sky that has forgotten how to look at anything. He stood in the gravel with his face tilted up toward the house as though he could feel its shadow falling on him, and he smiled at it, which Maximilian found unaccountably irritating, for he could not think what there was to smile at in a great cold pile of stone that had eaten its own light. Then the daughter stepped down without help. She was not what the rumour had built. The rumour, carried up from the town by a chambermaid and a carrier, had built something formidable, something to be braced against, a sharp and graceless creature, it was said, who did a man's work and gave a man's answers and would not be told. What came down from the trap was a plain young woman in a plain grey travelling dress, brown-haired, unremarkable to look at, until she lifted her head and considered the house the way a surgeon considers a wound, not in awe of it, but in calculation of what it would take to mend. She did not gape at the columns. She did not drop a curtsy toward the windows in case someone watched from behind them. She took her father's arm, and said something to him that made the old man laugh aloud in the empty court, and turned him toward the door as though she had turned him toward 1,000 doors, and would turn him toward 1,000 more, and the doors were nothing, and the man on her arm was everything. Maximilian stepped back from the window before they reached the steps. He told himself he had seen enough. He had not seen nearly enough, and some part of him already knew it, and resented the knowing. He did not go down to dinner. He had a tray sent up, and ate little of it, and told himself this was the prerogative of a man in his own house, And it was also a kind of hiding, and the two things wore the same coat so often that he had long since stopped troubling to tell them apart. In the morning he went up to the clock chamber, because he could not help himself, and because a duke may go anywhere in his own house and call it inspection. The chamber sat at the head of the east tower, a round stone room hung with the vast iron skeleton of the works, wheels taller than a man, 4 years of dust trailing from the gut lines like grey moss. The old man sat in a chair by the window with his blind face turned to the warmth of the early sun. The daughter was up among the wheels on a joiner's trestle, her sleeves turned back to the elbow, a lamp at her shoulder, and she had the escapement half apart in her 2 hands, with the patience of a person unpicking a knot in the dark. Crabbe stood below her with a second lamp, and when the Duke entered, his surprise was such that the flame tipped in his hand, and a tongue of oil light leapt up the curved wall before he steadied it. "Your Grace," said Crabbe. The old man rose at once, groping for the bow that was owed. "Your Grace, Reuben Sayer, and your servant. Forgive me that that my eyes will not let me find you." "Be seated, Master Sayer," said Maximilian, and to his own surprise the words came out without ice, for there was something in the old man's groping dignity that would not take ice, the way certain clean surfaces will not take a stain. But the daughter, up among the wheels, did not turn round. "You will forgive my back, your Grace," she said, "but if I take my hand from this pallet now, it will drop a tooth down into the barrel, and we shall be a day fishing for it. I will be civil to you presently, when civility is cheaper." Crabbe's lamp wavered a second time. "You are blunt," said Maximilian. "I am occupied," she said. "The two are forever being confused." He crossed the floor to stand below the trestle, where he could see the works she held. 4 years it has stood, he said. "I am told that is hard upon such a mechanism. It is hard upon anything to be stopped and left." She did not look down. Her hands went on with their small shore business. The oil that should run thin and bright goes to gum, and the gum holds every part in the shape it stopped in, and then a person comes along and is astonished that it will not move. They have no right to be astonished. Nothing moves easily that has been taught. For 4 years together, that stillness is its nature. She seated the pallet home with a small, precise click, and only then did she look down at him, and her eyes were grey and level and entirely without fear. "There. Now I am civil. Good morning, your Grace. Your clock has been very ill used." He should have crushed her. He had crushed better born than her, and for less. He had a way of lowering his voice and lengthening a silence that had quieted earls at his own table, and sent bishops groping after their next sentence. He lowered his voice. He lengthened the silence. She waited it out with her head a little to one side, the way one waits politely for a child to finish a sentence it has begun too ambitiously, and the silence, for the first time in 4 years, did not fill the room the way he meant it to. It simply sat there between them, and she waited inside it unbothered, and at the last it was he who had to end it, which had not once happened in the memory of any man living, and he heard himself say only, "See that it is woken then, and turn and go," and the going felt very like a retreat down a staircase he had built for other people to retreat down. He found Crabbe at the foot of the tower. "A clockmaker's daughter," he said, and the old vow came reaching back to his hand like a banister in the dark. "Sharp as a file and twice as cold. I tell you again, Crabbe, I would sooner let the whole estate go to ruin about my ears than sit a week at table with such a creature." "A se'nnight, your Grace," said Crabbe. "You needn't say it as though it were a sentence handed down. A week the master allows, perhaps a day or 2 less if the old gum gives way kindly." Crabbe agreed mildly. "The works have stood 4 years. One does not hurry a thing back to life that has spent so long learning to be dead." He let that settle, and did not look at his master while it settled. "I have put them in the east rooms. The fires are lit." "I did not order fires." "No, your Grace," said Crabbe. "You did not." Maximilian meant to keep clear of them. He did keep clear for the most part through that first day and the next, taking his meals apart, riding out in the grey mornings, finding in the wide acres of his own land a great many places a man might be that a clockmaker's daughter was not. But a house is a body, and she was working at the heart of it, and a man cannot live within a body and pretend he does not feel where the heart is. He heard her, through floors and along passages. the small ring of a tool set down, a phrase of the old man's, her low answer. Once, faintly, her voice reading something aloud in a tongue he did not at first place, and stopped on the stair to listen, and could not have said why. On the third morning he came down, meaning to take his breakfast alone, and found the two of them already at the small table in the east room, because Crabbe, who arranged such things and then arranged not to be blamed for them, had set them there. The old man had his hands about a warm cup. The daughter was buttering bread for him, laying each piece where his fingers would come to it without being told, and doing it so smoothly that a stranger would have sworn she did nothing at all. Maximilian sat, because to leave now would be to confess he had fled, and he would not confess it. For a while no one spoke. Then the daughter set down her knife. "There is a thing I ought to say, your grace," she said, "and you will not thank me for it, but I am not paid to be thanked, so it costs me nothing to say it. Your mill-race sluice is failing. The gate gear that lifts and drops the sluice is worn past its margin. I heard it grind as we crossed the race coming in, and I went down and looked at it yesterday, while the light held. The teeth are hooked thin as paper. It will hold in fair weather, but in a hard rain with the race up and the full head of water leaning on the gate, it will strip, and when it strips, the gate will jam, and then the water will go where the water pleases." "And where," said Maximilian, in the voice that quieted earls, "does the water please to go?" "Down the old course," she said, unquieted, "toward the cottages along the bottom meadow. I counted 6 chimneys. There may be more behind the hedge. Mistress Sayer." He set down his own cup with great care. "You are engaged to mend a clock. The drainage of my estate is the business of my mill-master and my clerk of the works, and, when it touches them, of me. It is not the business of a guest who has been 3 days under my roof and looked at a sluice in passing." "No," she agreed, perfectly even. "It is no business of mine at all. The families in those cottages are not my families. I shall very likely be gone home before the rain ever comes." She took up the knife again and went back to the bread. "I find only that I would rather be thought a meddler tomorrow than hold my tongue today, and be proved well-mannered at 6 families' expense. You may do as you please with it, your grace. You generally will." The old man laid his blind hand over hers, gently, a small private rebuke, or a small private pride, it was hard to tell which, and said, "Nell," in the soft, worn tone of a man who has said that one syllable across a workbench 10,000 times. "Forgive my daughter, your grace," said Reuben Sayer. "She was raised among gears, which keep no account of a man's rank, and she has caught their manners. But I will tell you this for her, and you may weigh it as you like. In 30 years, I have never known her wrong about a thing that turns." Maximilian rose. "Good day to you both," he said, and went out, and was out of temper the whole morning long, and could not for his life have told a soul whether he was angry at the impertinence or at the far more unbearable likelihood that she was right. The rain came 2 nights after. It came the way the worst of it always came in that country, without much warning, a thickening of the dark, a wind that turned the trees inside out and laid the long grass flat, and then the rain itself, not falling so much as flung, hour upon hour of it, until the gutters of the great house ran like races of their own, and the gravel of the court stood under an inch of moving water. Maximilian sat late in his study with a single lamp and a book he did not read, listening to it, and somewhere past midnight he grew aware that under the steady roar of the rain there was another sound, deeper and more urgent, a hammering at the side door, and then boots in the passage, and then his mill-master Toller in the doorway, streaming wet, white to the lips. "Your grace, the sluice," she stripped, just as the young woman said she would. "The gear's gone and jammed the gate half up, and the race is over the bank already and running for the bottom meadow. The bridge is down, the ford 6 feet and rising. There's no fetching the men up from the village this side of dawn, no, nor a horse across it." He hauled in a breath that shook. "And the clockmaker's daughter is down there now. She come past my window with a lantern not 10 minutes since. I could not stop her. I am not certain," he added, with the helpless honesty of an honest man, "that I tried so very hard." Maximilian was already on his feet and reaching for his coat. The night met him at the door like a flat hand laid against his chest. He had not been out in such weather in years. The cold of it, the sheer animal violence of it, woke something in him that the warm, dead house had let lie sleeping. Down the carriage sweep he went, behind the jerking smear of Tola's lantern, and across the drowned meadow path, and the noise of the race grew as they came until it was the whole of the world, a brown and bellowing thing throwing itself white against the stone of the sluice house. And there she was. She had got herself up onto the gate frame, onto the slick stone abutment above the killing water, with her lantern lashed to the rail by her own shawl, her skirts soaked black to the waist, and she was down on her knees over the wreck of the jammed gear with a crowbar and a hammer, working at it by the swinging light, while below her the water she meant to master clawed at the stone a hand's breadth from her feet. "Mistress Sayer!" he roared over the race. "Come off that! Come off it at once! Do you hear me? That is an order! Come down!" She looked round at him. The lantern lit one side of her face, and the rest of it was rain. "Then give me a better order," she called back, and did not move. "I can free this gate. I know how it is made, and I know where it is bound, and I can bring it down and shut the race off from the meadow. But I cannot do that and argue with a duke in the same hour. I have not the hands for both. So you may stand there and order me down and keep your pride and lose the cottages, your grace. Or you may come up here and put your weight where I tell you, and keep the families. Choose. I have not got all night, and neither have they." There was a moment, he would carry it the rest of his life, when the whole of him hung balanced over that brown water, to be ordered by a tradesman's girl up onto a sluice gate in the rain, to do as he was bid in his own meadow in front of his own millmaster. He climbed up onto the gate. "Tell me," he said, and she told him. For the better part of an hour she told him, and he obeyed. He had not obeyed a living soul in 30 years, and he obeyed her now without a thought to spare for the strangeness of it, because there was no room left in him for anything that was not the work. She set him to the long bar and braced his feet with a word and called when to heave and when to hold, and Tola below them swung the lantern and fetched what was named for, and the three of them fought the jammed gate by inches in the screaming dark. It would not come. It came an inch, and bound. She went down past him onto a ledge no wider than a book, to reach the underside of the rack, and his heart stopped in him, and her name tore out of him without his leave, not Mistress Sayer, only Nell, and she did not hear it, or chose not to, and got her bar beneath the one hook tooth that held the hole, and called, "Now, all of it, now." And he put the whole of himself onto that bar, the whole grieving weight of 4 silent years, and the gear let go with a crack like a gun, and the gate came down. The race shut. The bellow beneath them changed and dropped again. They felt, more than saw, the water out in the bottom meadow, stop climbing, and hang, and begin its slow brown retreat back into the proper course, off the doorsteps of 6 sleeping families who would wake in the morning and never once know how near the water had come, nor whose 2 hands had turned it back. She sat down on the wet stone, spent, the hammer loose in her fingers, and breathed. She did not cheer. She did not look to him for his praise. She looked first at the gate, to be sure that it would hold, and then at the falling water, to be sure of that too, and only when she was satisfied of both did she close her eyes for a moment in the rain, a woman quite alone with a finished thing, and he watched her be alone with it, and understood, with a slow, cold turning over inside him, that she had done the whole of it for the families and not 1 grain of it for him, that his regard had never once entered her reckoning, that he had been to her that night exactly what the crowbar had been, a weight to be set where it would do the most good and no more, and that this, precisely this, was the most extraordinary thing that had ever happened to him in his life. "You should go in," she said at last, not unkindly, opening her eyes. "You will take a chill. You are not used to it." "And you are," he said. "I'm used to a great many things, your grace." She gathered her shawl down off the rail, and the freed lantern with it, and climbed down off the gate, and she walked away up through the dark toward the house, alone, not waiting for him, not waiting to be thanked, the small light steady in her hand. Tola came and stood at the Duke's shoulder in the streaming dark. 40 year I've kept this race," said the millmaster. "I'd not have known to come at it from the rack side, nor had the nerve to put myself down on that ledge to do it." He shook his grizzled head slowly, and reached for the only words his whole vocabulary held that were equal to what he had seen. "That one, Your Grace. That one knows her work." Maximilian did not sleep. He sat in his wet shirt before a fire that Crabbe built up without being asked and without a word said, and he felt, for the first time in 4 years, the fortress that he lived in shift upon its foundations, one stone turning, the way her stripped gear had turned, with a crack like a gun. He went looking for her in the morning. He told himself he went to thank her as he ought, on the family's behalf, as a duke is bound to do. It was even in some narrow part the truth. He did not find her in the clock chamber. The old man was there alone, his hands moving over a tray of bright pivots, and he turned his blind face toward the door before Maximilian had spoken. "She is up on the roof, Your Grace," said Reuben Sayer. "The old observatory walk, above the long gallery. She goes up where it is high. She says she can think where there is sky." He smiled, that same untroubled smile. "She took no harm of the night. I thank you for asking, since I can hear that you mean to." Maximilian climbed to the observatory roof. It was a flat-leaded walk high above the long gallery, with a clean view across the park to the blue line of the hills, and there had stood a great brass telescope there once in his grandfather's day, but the brass was long since sold, and all that remained was the empty stone ring where the thing had been mounted. She sat upon the rim of that ring with a book open on her knees, her face turned up to the washed and brilliant morning, and she was reading aloud to herself, softly, and the words were not English. He stood at the head of the stair and listened before she knew that he was there. The Latin came off her tongue plainly, without the least display, the way a person speaks a thing they have spoken so often that it has become a kind of breathing. "You read Latin," he said. She did not start. "You say it, Your Grace, as a man might say, 'You handle snakes,' as though the letters should come off upon my hands and spoil the work." "I am astonished," he admitted, coming forward, "that he stopped himself, "that a clockmaker's daughter does." She turned a page without hurry. "My father had me taught it. He said a maker who cannot read the men who first set the heavens down in writing is a maker who only copies and never once understands. This is Manilius, upon the stars, and their order, and the law by which they move." She tilted the book a little toward the light. "He held, Your Grace, that the whole of the sky was one great clock, turning by a law you could not see but could nonetheless trust your life to, and that the one task worth a man's years was to find that law out and keep faith with it. I have thought, since I was a small girl, that this is the truest thing that anyone has ever written about anything, that the things worth the loving are the things that keep their time, whether or not you are there to watch them do it." He sat down upon the cold stone of the ring, a yard from her, a thing he would not have predicted of himself an hour before. "I had a book like that once," he said. "Marcus Aurelius. I read it the year I married. I thought it the most companionable thing in the whole world. One man alone, writing to himself in the small hours, keeping faith with an order that nobody about him could see." He looked out at the hills. "I came to believe, later, that I had loved it only because it was the book of a lonely man, and that I had recognized myself in it, and that this was nothing at all to be glad of." "It is the book of a lonely man," she allowed, "but you read it wrongly, if you read it as only that. He was lonely, and he kept the faith regardless. That is not the same thing as being lonely. It is very nearly the opposite of it." She closed the book over one finger. "My father is going blind, Your Grace. He has not seen a star these 3 years, and yet on every clear night he asks me to take him up to a window, or up here, and tell him where the planets stand, and I tell him, and he nods, and he is content. He keeps the faith with a sky he cannot any longer see. I have never in my life met a man less lonely, though by your reckoning he ought to be the loneliest soul alive." Maximilian said nothing for a long while. The wind moved over the leads, and somewhere below them a door was opened and shut. "I had told myself," he said at last, "that I preferred the silence. After my wife died, I had the clock stopped and the house kept quiet, and I told everyone who asked that it was grief." He heard the words come out of him with a kind of distant astonishment, as though some other man were saying them and he were only overhearing. "It was not grief. We had not loved one another, she and I. It was a marriage made between 2 families and 2 fortunes, and we were both of us decent enough to it, and neither of us was ever anything to the other but a courtesy. There was no wrong done. There was only a great quiet coldness for 9 years, and when she was gone, the silence after her was so much warmer than the silence we had kept while she was living in it, that I could not bring myself to give it up. I stopped the clock so that nothing should ever come along and prove to me that I was wrong to keep it. He looked down at his own hands. I have told that to no one. I do not know why I have told it to you. Because I go home in 2 days, she said simply, and a thing told to someone who is leaving is very nearly the same as a thing not told at all. She rose and tucked the book beneath her arm and looked down at him with that level grey gaze that asked nothing of him and forgave him nothing, and saw he was beginning to be afraid, the whole of him. You are not a lonely man because your wife is dead, Your Grace. You are a lonely man because you decided some morning to be one, and called it grief, because grief is respectable, and a man may wear it in company, and stop the clock so that nothing should ever come and argue you out of it. That is a very great deal of trouble to go to, only to stay unhappy. She moved toward the head of the stair. Mind the 3rd step down. It is loose. I would have your man see to it, but I dare say you would rather it stay dangerous, on a point of principle. He sat upon the roof a long time after she was gone. He found Crabbe that afternoon in the gun-room, and asked him, with as much carelessness as he could counterfeit, what was known of the sayer's circumstances. And Crabbe, who had decided some days before that the season for saying nothing was drawing toward its close, told him what he knew. They are ruined, Your Grace, in everything but the name of the thing. Master Sayer stood surety some years back for a partner who failed and fled, and the whole of the debt came down upon his head, and the sight went the same year, of the strain of it, the physician thinks, as much as the years, and a clockmaker who cannot see is a clockmaker who cannot earn, whatever name the dial carries. They sold the good house in the town, and they live now behind the shop. The creditors have been patient only because the daughter pays down what she can to the shilling, and is known the length of the street for an honest dealer. He folded his hands. There is a regulator, Your Grace, a great standing clock, the master's own masterwork, the finest thing ever to come off the Sayer bench, 9 years in the building, begun under his own eyes and finished when the sight had gone, under his daughter's hands to his design, and he would never sell it for any price offered, and I am told the creditors have set their eye upon it at the last, and that it must go this quarter, it, and a sum of money beside it, that they have not got and cannot raise, or the shop is shut, the sign comes down, and the old man goes upon the parish. And the daughter, said Maximilian, that, Your Grace, is the other thing. Crabbe was quiet a moment, choosing it. I had it from the carrier, who had it from the whole town, for the town has long made free with it. She has had 3 offers of marriage these 4 years. Good ones, every one. A corn factor with his own carriage, a widowed apothecary, comfortable, kind by all accounts, and a master of her father's own trade, who would have taken the shop and the debt and the old man altogether into the bargain. She refused, the 3 of them. Why? That, said Crabbe, I do not know. The town does not know. The town has settled it among themselves that she is proud, or cold, or simply a fool who does not know her own good fortune when it knocks. He paused. I do not think she is any of the 3, but I will not pretend to you, Your Grace, that I know what she is instead. Maximilian stood a long hour in the long gallery after that, among the painted dead of his own house, and did not know either, and the not knowing was worse to him than any blow had ever been, for it had a shape, and the shape of it was a question he was afraid to learn the answer to. That evening Crabbe went, upon his own quiet authority, to the old man in the small parlour, where the Sayers sat after their supper, and spoke with him gently of this and that, and let the matter of the regulator find its own way into the talk. And he came back and laid before his master, without a word of comment of his own, what the old man had said. He weeps over it, Your Grace, said Crabbe, and his voice, which had buried 2 dukes without a tremor in it, was not entirely steady now. Not for himself. He says he could bear the parish well enough at his age, and that a man who has had good work and good bread for 70 years has no call to whine at the close of it. He weeps because the regulator was to have been his daughter's, her portion. The one thing of worth he had it in his power to leave her. The proof, made plain for any eye to read that her 2 hands had built the finest clock in England under his name and his honour, and now it must go to a creditor, who will stand it in a cold hall and never once wind it true, and she will be left with nothing of her father in the world but the debt that outlived him. He stopped and steadied himself, and went on. He said to me, Your Grace, he said, she gave up the whole of her life to keep my shop open, and I cannot even leave her the shop. Maximilian could not sleep. He rose past midnight and walked the dark house in his shirt, as he had walked it on 100 nights. But tonight the silence that he had loved so long had turned to something else under his feet, something that pressed in upon him, and he could not find anywhere in it the room that used to hold him and let him rest. He came down the great stair and along the lower passage toward the small parlour, where a single thread of candlelight showed beneath the door that never quite shut, and a low sound of voices behind it, and he stopped, because he knew the voices, and a gentleman does not stand and listen at doors. He stood and listened at the door. You are not to fret over it any more tonight, father, she was saying, low, in the warm, dark voice she kept, for no one in the world but the old man. We have been low before this, and come up again. We will come up again. Not this low, Nell, never this low, not where I cannot earn a penny toward it with my own hands. A long pause, and then the small wet sound of an old man mastering himself, and failing, and mastering himself again. I have been doing a sum tonight, child, that I have never once in 4 years let myself sit down and do. A sum of what you might have been. Mary Coke married her corn factor, and keeps her own carriage now, and a girl to dress her hair, and has not a quarter of your wit nor a tenth of your heart. You might have had a house of your own, children at your knee, a young man to keep you and to cherish you, instead of an old blind one to be kept. 3 times it came and knocked at your hand, Nell. 3 good men, 3 open doors, and 3 times I watched you send it away and shut the door yourself, and I let you. God forgive me, I let you do it, because I could not for my life do without you. His voice broke clean across. I have spent my own daughter to keep a shop alive. I am ashamed, Nell. I am so ashamed I can hardly bear to sit in the same dark with you. And then her voice, and the Duke of Ellesmere on the cold flags beyond the door stopped his very breathing to hear it. Now you listen to me, she said, and there was no edge in it at all, none of the file, none of the bluntness that had stunned his table and stopped his earl's quieting silence dead in the air. There was only a tenderness so plain and so entire that it came through the oak of the door and through the man standing behind it, like light coming up through still water. You did not spend me. I was never yours to spend, nor any man's. Now hear the whole of it, for I have never told you the whole of it, and you have grieved 4 years for want of hearing it. I sent those 3 men away, not one of them for your sake, and not one of them against my own. I sent them away because not one of the 3 would have had you in the bargain. Not truly, not gladly. The corn factor wanted my eyes for the keeping of his ledgers, and my back for the bearing of his sons, and he would have boarded you out with a woman in the next street and called once a quarter and thought himself a saint for it. The apothecary wanted a nurse against his own old age, and no more than that. I saw it in him the first evening, the way you see a flaw run through a wheel. And the clockmaker wanted the shop, and the goodwill, and the sayer name over the door, and he would have set you in a chair by the back fire, and let you go quietly out like a banked coal, and called it kindness, and believed it was. Not one of the 3 of them wanted you, and I will not, do you hear me, father? I will not go into any house in all of England that has not got a warm room standing ready in it for you. I would sooner mend other men's watches at this bench until my own 2 hands fail me and go to the dark. You are not a debt that I am paying down by the shilling. You are the man who taught me to read the stars and the inside of a watch, and the worth of my own 2 hands when the whole world told me a girl's hands were worth nothing, and I am yours, and I will not leave you. There is no sum in that. There never was a sum in it. Now dry your eyes, and stop doing your dreadful arithmetic in the dark, and come up to bed. The old man wept then, the way a man weeps when he has been told, at the very last, the one thing he had not let himself believe in all his years. And she went to him, and held him, and the candle guttered and steadied, and the Duke of Ellesmere stood in his own cold corridor with the back of his hand pressed hard against his own mouth, and felt the last stone of the fortress turn over and come down. He saw himself entire then, and all at once as she must have seen him on the roof, a man who had stopped a clock so that nothing in the world could come and prove him wrong, a man who had called his cowardice grief, and his pride wisdom, and his loneliness a preference, and had been so well pleased with the three of those lies that he had stood up in the cold of a dawn and said the worst of them aloud to his steward, "I would sooner let Ellsmere crumble," and thought himself unanswerable. And 4 floors above his head a clockmaker's daughter, who had been offered every single thing he had sneered at her for going without, had turned her back on the whole of it, not out of pride, and not out of some cold denial of herself, but out of a love so large that there was simply no room left over in it for advantage. And at this very hour she was giving away, plainly and without a tremor, the one thing he had not been able to give a living soul in 4 years, and could not have given under torture. She was telling another human being that she would not leave them, that there was no sum in it, that there had never been a sum. He did not go back to his bed. He sat upon the great stair until the windows greyed, and he reckoned with himself, and the reckoning was not kind to him, and he made himself sit still and let it be unkind. And somewhere in the cold last hours before the dawn, the proud man who had come down those stairs got up off them a different one. He found her at first light in the clock chamber, alone. She was up upon the trestle, and the works were whole about her now, oiled and bright and dressed of their 4 years' grey, and as he came in at the low door she reached up and laid the weight-rope home upon its barrel, and let the great wheel take the strain of it, and the clock, the dead clock, the clock that had not stirred since the very minute his wife went out of the world, drew one long breath, and began with a slow and a deep and an unanswerable certainty to tick. He stood and listened to it. After 4 years of silence it was the loudest sound in all the world. "It will want winding every 8th day," she said, not turning round, her hands busy yet upon the rope. "I have left my father's directions written fair with your man, and the spare gut beside them. The strike is set off for the present. I did not know whether you would want the hours called aloud again over the park, or whether you had grown too fond of the quiet to give it up. That much you may settle for yourself. But the going train is yours from this morning. Whatever you do about the bell, a house should at the least know what hour it is, whatever it chooses to do about the knowing." She made fast the last turn and climbed down off the trestle and wiped her hands upon a cloth, brisk and finished, a workwoman come to the clean end of a commission. "There is the small matter of the account, your grace, but my father will wait upon you about that. It is not a thing for me to—" "I know about the regulator," he said. She went still. "I know your father must surrender his masterwork this quarter, and a sum beside it. He cannot raise, or lose the shop, and the sign, and his bread. I know what the thing is to him. I know whose 2 hands made it." He drew a breath. "And I have come to you this morning to ask you not to let it go. I will settle the debt, the whole of it, this quarter's, and all that stands behind this quarter's, to the last shilling. The regulator stays in your father's house, and I will see him provided for to the end of his days, a pension upon this estate, a physician at his call, his comforts, the shop kept open in his own name with a journeyman set under his direction, so that the trade goes on and the sign over the door still reads Sayer. That is done, Mistress Sayer. That is decided, and it stands whatever else is said in this room between us this morning, and you may not refuse it on his behalf, for it is offered to him, and not to you, and it is not yours to send away." She had turned to face him now, the cloth forgotten in her 2 hands, and for the first time since she had come under his roof there was something in the grey eyes that was not quite level, something that had been struck and had not yet found again its balance. "That," she said very carefully, "is a very great deal of money, for 6 cottages and a clock." "It is not for the cottages, nor the clock." "Then I cannot think for what." "Because I am asking you to marry me," he said. The clock ticked between them, slow and deep, and counted out the silence. "I am asking you to marry me," he said again, for he found that, having begun the sentence, he could not leave off until the whole of it was spoken into the air. "And I have set the other matter to stand apart from this one on purpose, and said it first, and made it certain, so that you should know past all doubting that this is no bargain I am putting to you. Your father is provided for, whether you take me or refuse me to my face this minute. The debt is gone, either way. The regulator stays in his house, either way. I will not have you say yes to me to save him. He is already saved. I have put him clean beyond the reach of your answer, so that your answer, when it comes, can be only and entirely your own. There. It is the one wholly decent thing I have done in 4 years, and I have done it chiefly so that I might ask you the rest of it honestly, with clean hands. Eleanor Sayer. Will you marry me? She looked at him a long while. The light was coming up grey, and then gold through the great glass of the dial behind her, and laying itself in long bars along the quiet turning wheels. "And what," she said at last, "do I take?" He did not understand her. "I have told you. The debt, the pension, the house, that is what my father takes." Her voice was very quiet now. "And you have been more generous than anything I know how to answer. I will not stand here and pretend the generosity does not move me, for it does. It moves me past my speaking. But you have given the whole of it to him, carefully, deliberately, every penny of it set in his name and not in mine, so that I should know I am not being bought. Well then, I am not bought. Hear me say it. I am not bought. So I will ask you the one question you have left standing in the middle of this room and walked all the way round. If I am not to take the money, and not to take the rescue, and not to take the clock, then what is it that I take, your grace, when I take you? A house. I have seen what you do with a house, a title. I have not the smallest earthly use for one. What is it that I take when I take you, and nothing else of yours along with it? And the Duke of Ellesmere, who had quieted earls and sent bishops groping, stood in the ticking chamber and was stripped down to nothing at all, and he found that nothing at all was the only true thing he had to give her, and he gave it. "You take a man who has been wrong," he said. "You take a man who stopped a clock for 4 years, so that no one living could prove to him that he was still alive, and called it grief, and knew the whole time that it was cowardice, and chose it anyway. You take a man who said in this very house not 6 days since that he would sooner let Ellsmere crumble stone by stone than wed a clockmaker's daughter, and who has thought, every hour since the night of the flood, that he would sooner let it crumble to the last stone than stand in his own gate tomorrow and watch you climb up into that hired trap and drive away out of it. You take a man with no practice at all in this, and a great deal to be forgiven, and not the first idea in his head of how a man goes about being loved, only a sudden and a complete and a terrifying certainty that he would like to be taught it, and that there is no other soul on the earth he would consent to be taught it by. You take a man who has nothing to offer you that you have not already stood up and proved in front of his own millmaster that you can do without, except this, only this, that he is, this morning, for the first time in 4 years awake, and that it was you who woke him, the same as you woke that. He put out his hand toward the turning wheels. That is what you take when you take me, Eleanor. A poor enough bargain, set against the clock. The clock is by a long way the better mechanism, and the more used to you and the more faithful. But it is the whole of what I have, and I am holding the whole of it out to you, which is more than I have held out to any living creature in my life, and it is yours if you will have it, and if you will not have it, then it is yours still, for I shall not be offering it to anybody else." She did not say that she needed time to think on it. She set the cloth down upon the trestle and crossed the small space of floor between them, and looked up into his face, and what was in her own face now was not guarded in the least. "3 things," she said, and her voice was not entirely steady either now. "I will say yes, and I will mean it, and I will never once unsay it. But 3 things first, and they are not bargains, mind. They are only the shape of me, and you had far better know the shape of a thing before you put a ring upon it. The first you have given already, but I will say it out so that it is said between the 2 of us, and not only between me and my father. There will always, in any house of mine, be a room kept for him, the best room, the warm one that gets the sun, and I will go to him when he has need of me, and you will never, not once, make me choose between you. The second is that I will not be set upon a shelf and dusted. I have hands, and they are good hands, and the world has had little enough good of them yet. I mean to keep my father's craft alive with them under our own roof, if it pleases me to, duchess or no duchess, and you will not be ashamed of it, nor of me, nor of the oil under my nails on the days there is oil under my nails. And the third," her breath caught, "the third is that you will never stop that clock again, whatever comes to us. Whomever we lose in the long running of the years, we let it run. We keep the time, even the bad time, even the hours we would give our right hands not to have to look at. That is the whole of my religion, your grace, and I'll not marry a man who keeps some easier one." "Maximilian," he said. She looked at him. "My name," he said, "is Maximilian. I would have you use it. I find I am very tired of being a title." "Maximilian," she said. "To all three," he said. "To all three, and gladly, and the third of them most of all." And he drew from his finger a small worn ring that he had worn there 4 years and never once taken off, not the great crested ring of the dukedom, but a plain thin band of gold, worn down with another hand's wearing. "This was my mother's. It is not grand. She was not a grand woman. She was the last person who ever stood in this house and laughed aloud in it, and meant the laugh." He took up her hand, the good clever scarred working hand that had shut the race in the dark, and held it as though it were the more breakable of the two, which in that one moment it was. "Will you, Eleanor? Will you have me and the whole poor awakened ruin of me and teach me the rest?" "I will," she said. "I do. There, and I shall not say it twice, so mind that you heard it the once." And then the file came back, just a little, into her voice. But soft now, the edge of it all turned round to something that was very near to laughter. "You may kiss me, Maximilian, if you can manage it without first giving it as an order. I begin to think that you can." He could. He went to find her father that same morning, before the dew was off the grass, and the old man was sitting in the library with his blind face turned to the window and the new sun upon it, and Maximilian stood before him, not as a duke stands before a tradesman, but as one man stands before the father of the woman he means to wed, and said as much, plainly, and asked the old man's blessing, and put out his hand, and then had to guide the groping hand of the other gently in to find it. Reuben Sayer held the duke's hand in both of his a long moment, his pale eyes streaming and steady at once. "I have nothing to give her, your grace," he said. "You know it. You have arranged the world so that I shall not even have my poverty left to give. I am a poor figure of a father, that the man who would marry my girl must first pay me before he is suffered to ask her." "You taught her to read the stars that she will not now let me ignore," said Maximilian, "and the inside of a watch, and the worth of her own 2 hands, and how a person may love past all advantage, and count themselves the richer for it. She told me so herself, through a door, last night, not knowing that I stood and heard her. You have given her the whole of what she is, Master Sayer, and what she is the only thing of any worth that has come under this roof in 4 years. The debt was nothing, a duke's small change. Do not, I beg you, speak to me again of who has paid what to whom." He pressed the old hand in both of his. "I ask one thing of you only. The shop stays open, in your name, with your journeyman, and you to direct the whole of it as long as there is breath in you, blind or seeing, by your daughter's hands when she is near, and by your own good voice when she is not. I'll not have the craft die for want of a master. A man should leave his work running behind him in the world. You taught me that too last night, through the very same door, and never knew you taught it." The old man bowed his head and wept, and gave his blessing in a voice not fit for much beyond the giving of it, and the 2 men sat together a long, easy while in the library, while above them, faint and certain through all the stone of the old house, the clock kept the hour it had at the last been given leave to keep. It was Crabbe who met the Duke in the gallery as he came away. "Your Grace will forgive me," said the steward, who had plainly been somewhere about the doors, as he had a lifetime's habit of being somewhere about the doors. "I served your father, and his father before him, and I have stood at a good many weddings and a good many gravesides of this house, and I have learned to tell, mostly, which way a thing is set to run." He inclined his head, the smallest fraction of an inch, and there was at the corner of his mouth the very faintest suppressed movement that on any lesser man would have been a smile. The late duchess was a great lady, and did her duty by the house, and the house was the colder for the doing of it, and none of it her fault nor yours. This one will be no great lady at all. She will warm the house instead. Your line has wanted exactly that, your grace, for the better part of 100 years, and could never once afford to buy it, for it was never a thing that was for sale. He folded his hands. I wish you joy. I find I have been wishing it some days now, and only waiting for leave to say so aloud. You arranged the fires, said Maximilian, and the breakfast table, and the small parlour, with the door that does not quite shut. I cannot think what your grace means, said Crabbe. I am only a steward. I keep the house warm. It is the whole of my office. And he went away down the gallery about his business, and did not let his master see the rest of the smile until he had safely turned the corner. They were married in the spring, in the small grey church at the edge of the park, and it was a small wedding by the measure of dukes, which is to say there were no more than 200 people in the county who would have given an arm to be asked and were not. Reuben Sayer was led up the aisle on Crabbe's steady arm to give his daughter away, and he could not see her face, but he turned his own toward the place where her voice was when she spoke her vows, and he was the only man in the whole church who heard, beneath the plain words of it, the small particular catch in her breath that he had known since she was a child, the one that meant she meant a thing past all unmeaning, and he wept to hear it, and this time he was not ashamed of the weeping, and let it come. 3 months on a clear gold evening at the very turn of the summer, the Duke and Duchess of Ellesmere stood together in the East Court beneath the tower, and the new set strike, which she had at the last consented to wake on the 3rd night of their marriage with her own hand, gathered itself slowly in the works above their heads, and let fall the hour. 1, 2, and on, to the full and unhurried count of it, the bell of Ellesmere calling the time out over the park for the first time in 4 years and more, out over the bottom meadow, and the 6 safe cottages, and the running race, so that the whole estate for the space of 1 gold evening knew what hour it was, and was the gladder for being told. You said a thing, you know, the first morning of all, she said, standing in the curve of his arm, her head against him, the two of them looking up together at the lit face of the dial. You said it to your steward, in the cold, before ever you had set eyes upon me, that you would sooner let Ellsmere crumble stone by stone than wed a clockmaker's daughter. You told me of it yourself, in the clock chamber. You put it into your asking, and I have never forgotten that you did, for it was the truest thing in the whole of the speech. I did say it, he said, and I meant it too, that morning, with my whole cold heart. It was the truest sounding lie I ever told in my life. And now, he was quiet a moment, and listened to the last stroke of the hour ring itself away into the gold air over the park. Now, he said, I would let every stone of it fall, and the tower along with the rest, and this clock you have given back to me, and the bell, and the whole long count of the hours I have left to live. I would let the whole of it stop, and stop it gladly with my own hand, before I would let go of you. Everything else under heaven may keep its own time, or lose it, and welcome. You are the one thing I will not have stopped. I know, she said. I have known it since the roof. And she turned her face up to be kissed, beneath the chiming tower, and was, and somewhere not far off a child of the village, who would never know whose hands had once turned the black water back from its cradle, was being carried home along the safe meadow path in the last of the light. Above them the hands moved on, keeping faith with an order they could not see and had no need to see, the way the truest things in the world keep faith, and in the warm south room that caught and held the last of the day, where Crabbe had settled him for the whole of the summer with a rug across his knees, and the window standing open to the bell, a blind old clockmaker lifted his face to the sound of the falling hour, and smiled, and kept the time in his heart where he had always kept it, and was, by any reckoning that has ever been worth the making, the least lonely man alive.